Welcome to Weather and Earth 25, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this special video for the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. We're actually going to take a look at what kind of season we could expect in the Atlantic this year. And believe it or not, it's coming from an unlikely source. What if I told you guys that Chinese astrology could actually help see what kind of large-scale, big-scale pattern could exist in the Atlantic that could lead to having a certain type of season where we could have many hurricanes and high impact events. It may sound crazy, and this video, of course, prediction is an experiment that I'm doing, but I do have pretty good confidence in it. You know, the Chinese Zodiac, also known as Chinese astrology, can really help us see what may be coming up ahead. In fact, the previous video that I made to this one, we used the same kind of astrology to see if 2024 could have major earthquake activity. And that's, something that if you want, you can go ahead and take a look at that video that I posted a few months ago, where I talk a lot about this particular zodiac year that we're in. And we'll cover that right now too, because it's concerning this season. So let's get right to it. 2024 is the year of the wood dragon in Chinese astrology. This is an element and year combination with the animal sign that happens every 60 years. So the last time there was such a year as the wood dragon was 1964. Now, Chinese astrology is a general cycle of 12 in which every 12 years we see the same animal sign. And the year of the dragon right now, the last time we had a year of the dragon was 2012. And 2000 before that, and 1988 before that, and so on. But in Chinese astrology, there's also 5 elements. So each of these dragon animal signs also get imbued with certain characteristics thanks to the elements. So it's like colors, basically. For example, the year of the water dragon is like the blue dragon. The year of the wood dragon, this one right now, is the green dragon. And that's how they know it in Asia. It's known as the green dragon year. So, if we really take a look at this stuff, perhaps there is such a thing as a 60-year cycle and a 12-year cycle in nature that exists, and this Chinese astrology actually helps us to see that cycle in a more fun way, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to get a little more scientific here. There may be real natural cycles at play. Chinese astrology's been in our lives for thousands of years. This stuff comes from way back in the day, and it's been a tradition ever since about 4,000 plus years ago. There's a lot of wisdom herein, and I decided to use it to see what could happen with this hurricane season and what this animal sign could bring us, if there's a correlation of sorts. So, in order to do this, we have to see the history of these kind of years. So we're going to take a look at all dragon years for starters. And take a look at this. This is a graphic that I actually made showing where the significant year of the dragon hurricanes occur and the impact locations. We're basically looking at hurricanes that were either major hurricanes or that they struck at about category 2 or greater. I decided to pick category 2 because that's about the category where we started really having significant hurricane impacts, and the hurricane becomes fairly memorable and eventful when it hits with about 100 miles an hour or more. That's when real heavy damage can occur, and a lot of the destructive things that happen in hurricanes, it just gets exponential after you hit the 100 mile an hour mark, which is category 2. Look at all those lines. Look at all those tracks. These are all different hurricane tracks that happen in the year of the dragon. All the years of dragon between 1712 and 2012. So that's a neat 300-year span. And if you divide 300 by 12, you get 25. So this is 25 dragon years worth of data. And also the tracks, the lines that you see there are individual hurricane tracks. They're color coded, so you can see what kind of dragon it was that occurred with that hurricane track. For example, you see the one that says 1928 September, and it's a really long track that goes right into the islands and then towards Florida in the color yellow. The yellow representing the Earth Dragon year. That was on an Earth Dragon year. The red ones correlating to Fire Dragon. The blue lines correlating to Water Dragon. You can see there's that one track that hit the northeast where that purple X is. That was 2012 Hurricane Sandy. It was an extratropical storm when it landed there, so that's why I actually have the little X in purple. But all the other X's you see on the map where the hurricane struck land, they're either white or they're orange. The white X's are where the hurricane struck at around Category 2. The orange X's indicates a major hurricane impact, Category 3 or higher. And so you can see there's a lot of these in these kind of years. That's a lot of action for just a sample of 25 years. So it's almost guaranteed that we're going to see at least one major hurricane impact this year. Just looking at this plot of lines, there's easily over 20 lines there, you know. So the Wood Dragon seasons are the ones in green, which interestingly enough is probably among the most dominant one on this map, which translates to that Wood Dragon years are actually probably one of the busiest parts of the Dragon year cycle. So every 60 years, this particular 60-year cycle is really active. And another thing I want you to notice is there's actually certain trends in the tracks relative to the element of the year. So there's also like these little mini cycles within the cycle. That's why 60-year cycle is very important. The Wood Dragon lines, which are all the green ones, they more or less stay within the middle. They're middle of the pack tracks. You see, a lot of the blue ones, they tend to stay more towards the east side of the map, affecting areas more east in the Caribbean, going north into the Mid-Atlantic. You see the yellow tracks tend to stay fairly south, going into the Gulf of Mexico or to Florida. The red ones stay very far southwest. You know, most of these went into the Gulf of Mexico. So Fire Dragon years really favor the Gulf of Mexico. But the green ones went right down to more or less about the middle. So we're talking about a track that could originate in the Atlantic, go straight into the Leeward Islands, into the Greater Antilles, affecting places like Barbados, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, and ultimately those storms would curve more towards either the Gulf of Mexico or straight up into Florida and hugging the east coast of the U.S. So it's a very dangerous pattern, actually. I mean, it really looks like Wood Dragon years favor high-impact hurricanes that really just make multiple landfalls right down the middle track. They don't really seem to have a lot of these storms missing land or staying far south in the Caribbean where they just brush, the northern part of South America and not really do much. They take basically one of the most dangerous kinds of tracks that you can see in hurricanes. And speaking of the Wood Dragon, the one year that I really have in mind for the coming season is 1964. That was the previous Wood Dragon year. And it also happened to be the most busy Dragon year as far as accumulated cyclone energy is concerned, which is a metric that takes into account, how big and strong the hurricanes were and how long these hurricanes stayed major. 1964 had 13 named storms, had 7 hurricanes, but it had 5 major hurricanes. And 4 of these were very significant. This is the map for 1964. And right here you can see the main events that happened. One was in the Gulf of Mexico, and the other 3 were basically Caribbean, well, 2 of them were Caribbean hurricanes. One in October, one in August, and the other one, the September one, came from the east, but Florida got hit 3 times that year. And one landfall in the Gulf of Mexico, and all these hurricanes at one point in their life were major. The most important storm of the year perhaps was named Cleo. It formed in August, in late August, traversed right through the islands, went right into Haiti, between Haiti and Jamaica, but actually made landfall in southwest Haiti, curved into Cuba, and then went straight up the east side of Florida, affecting Miami and Fort Lauderdale directly as it went further north. When it hit Cuba and Haiti, this hurricane was a very powerful Category 3, and it was even a Category 4 right before hitting Haiti. A very powerful hurricane, left a lot of damage, a lot of destruction. And this could be a really good analog for what we can see in 2024 among some of these other tracks, like for example Isabel, which happened in October. It started in the Caribbean, passed over western Cuba, and turned northeast over South Florida, and then went up, kind of curving toward North Carolina. The main impacts were in Cuba and South Florida. This storm hit as a Category 2, almost Category 3 at one point, pretty significant hurricane. And then we had Hurricane Dora that came from the east in September, and it went straight into the Jacksonville, St. Augustine area from the east, a very rare track, impacting the side of the state that doesn't see that many hurricane impacts. Hit them as a Category 2 as well. So there's a lot of, risk here for Florida, in my opinion. It may be one of the most important places to watch in 2024, more than the typical year. Now, of course, there's other places besides Florida that could get hit, so let me show you this guy. This is some map that I made based off of all this historic analogs, the more likely tracks that we could see this year. Now, mind you, this is not expected to happen all at the same time. We're not going to see this. I'm not expecting 8 landfalling hurricanes. I mean, God forbid if that really happened. That would be absolutely insane. I mean, in the worst case scenario, I would say maybe 4 of these tracks will verify, or 3 of them. But I've listed them more or less in order from the most likely to the least likely. And that's when they're in different colors, and there's a legend there underneath the nice little wood dragon, image that I have there, that it shows the colors and the number of the track. So out of these 8 possible significant hurricane tracks for this year, tracks 1 through 4 are more likely to happen than tracks 5 through 8. That's all that's basically showing. This is mainly based on how typical these tracks can be and how many times they've occurred during these dragon years, including the wood dragon year. Track number 1 is basically very similar to what Hurricane Cleo did in 1964. Track number 2 is more like what the 1928 hurricane did, as it ravaged Puerto Rico and it went straight into the Bahamas and Florida. Track number 4, for example, would be basically Hurricane Isabel from 1964. Hurricane number 5 is basically similar to Hurricane Gilbert from 1988. And track number 8 would be what Hurricane Dora did in 1964. So that's basically the kind of tracks that I've been thinking about that could happen this year. And whenever we see a hurricane develop later this year, as we near the peak of the season, we may want to keep these tracks in mind to see if maybe one of these storms will try to emulate one of these tracks, And you can see there's a lot of intersecting points on these tracks in the Western Caribbean. A lot of these tracks go over the Leeward Islands, and some of them affect the Greater Antilles. Quite a few of these tracks affect Florida in particular, and especially Southeast Florida. I mean, this is a far more risky year for Southeast Florida than the past several years. They've been pretty lucky in past years with major hurricanes. Most of these storms have not hit Miami, Fort Lauderdale directly. Even Hurricane Ian in 2022, which devastated Fort Myers and Cape Coral, it really didn't do much to Miami, Fort Lauderdale. Hurricane Irma also missed them by a hair. I feel like this year there's a really decent chance that Miami, Fort Lauderdale could at least get brushed by a hurricane, if not actually directly impacted. So just a heads up for anybody living in the Sunshine State. I think 2024 could be the real deal, guys. It could be the real deal. So yeah. So that's basically the tracks that I'm thinking that could happen for 2024. And then let me show you this other graphic that I made, which is important. It goes hand in hand with that one. It's practically where I believe we could see the strongest chances of seeing a hurricane landfall of Category 2 or higher, based on this Chinese astrology, investigation. In reality, we're using the astrology to determine that there is 60-year cycles and 12-year cycles that work hand in hand. It's like 2 cycles within the cycle, and these are the places that would most likely be at risk based on history. So you can see basically most of the Caribbean islands are red or purple, so they're extremely higher chance of actually getting hit this year. This basically assuming that there's going to be 1 or 2 long track hurricanes that basically make multiple landfalls, like the ones that you saw in the previous charts. Florida is basically all in red because a lot of these Caribbean storms are going to go north into Florida, most likely. And then the places in yellow, they have a medium chance, which will probably also could be the same storms that go into the Caribbean or hit the islands, but there's a slightly lower chance that they could actually miss Florida and then go for the Bahamas into the Carolinas, for example, or that they track further west and go into the Gulf of Mexico, hit the Yucatan, maybe Louisiana and Texas. And if the hurricane season ends up being insanely bonkers, we might see all things on the table. We get that big hurricane going through the islands and into Florida, and we could get another one going from the Caribbean to the Gulf of Mexico, and we could even get another one going up the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, this season has potential to be nuts, and this is not just my idea. If you guys have been watching, the actual professional meteorology predictions for hurricane season 2024, there's a lot of dark stuff out there that the experts are seeing that have made them put out the most aggressive hurricane forecast that I've ever seen. I mean, NOAA was calling for something like 17 to 24 or 25 named storms, 6 major hurricanes, something like that, like really aggressive numbers. And on my end, I'm actually thinking that it could be very close to that. I mean, my own prediction, which is also experimental, by the way, is that 2024's season totals may end up being something close to 25 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and 7 major hurricanes. How did I get these numbers, you might wonder? Well, believe it or not, it was Chinese astrology again. Of course, this is experimental, but I figured I would take a wood dragon year into consideration, and a fairly active wood dragon year. Because right now, in the 2020s, we're in a really crazy, climatic pattern that favors a lot of major hurricanes and high activity. This is what they call the active era of hurricanes. Sometimes there's inactive eras, sometimes there's active eras. So 1964 was in a much quieter era than the one that we're in now. And when I looked at 1964, that hurricane season had 13 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. It may sound fairly average to the numbers now, but when you compare it to the actual old average from back in those days, 1964 was quite a beast. This hurricane season, the average was 9 storms, like named storms, 5 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes. That was the old average. So if you compare 1964's totals to the old averages, 1964 was roughly 1.5 times the normal. About 145% the number of named storms, 140% the number of hurricanes, and a whopping 167% of the major hurricanes. So what I did here is I took those percentages and multiplied that by the most recent 10-year average, which is from 2014 through 2023, which was last year. I did my own calculations and saw that the recent 10-year average is 70 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. So if we take those average numbers and multiply them by the percentages from 1964 relative to its old numbers, so the 145%, 140%, 167%, we multiply those percentages to the current 10-year average, you're going to end up with those big numbers. You get 25, 11, and 7. So that's how I'm getting these numbers. I do acknowledge this could be more of a worst case scenario. I mean, I would suppose and hope that there's a chance that these numbers will bust too high and the season may actually have less norm, like named storms, and less hurricanes in general. Maybe it ends up being more like 1964, but I think we're going to see at least 20 named storms, to be honest, man. I mean, I'd be surprised if we didn't. But that's my prediction. 25 named storms, 11 hurricanes, 7 major hurricanes. And there's one more thing I can also say about this. I mean, going back to this original chart that I showed you guys with the history of dragon year hurricanes and their tracks from 1712 to 2012. Look at the dates. The grand majority of these major impact hurricanes happened in August, September, and October. And I'm not showing it here, but if you fine tune the dates a bit, you will notice that the year of the dragon tends to be very heavy with activity around the peak of the season. Some hurricane seasons have a fast start and they fade really quickly. 2021 was such a year. Some hurricane seasons have a pretty active start and stay active the entire season, and are actually extremely backloaded, where they can have their most crazy events towards the end of the year. That's basically what 2020 was. But 2024 is probably going to be one of those seasons where it may be fairly quiet until we get to that early part of August, and then suddenly everything explodes. And then, the remainder of August, all of September, and the first half of October could be just back-to-back big hurricanes, lots of tropical systems just blossoming everywhere. History shows that. So I'd say this is a year to keep an eye out, right around the traditional peak of hurricane season, which is, early September. And, most of the real hurricane activity usually happens between August 20th and October 25th, more or less. And that might be the time frame between August 20th and October 25th that we may actually see the grand majority of 2024's, big hurricanes and high impact storms. And that's basically, something we could also infer thanks to this Chinese astrology, history, for these actual zodiac years. So there you go, guys. That's what I'm thinking is looking likely for 2024. Remember, these are the areas that are most likely to probably get impacted by a Category 2 or higher storm this year. If I had to say what kind of scenarios could we expect once again for this season, the first scenario could be a hurricane similar to Hurricane Cleo of 1964, where we have a powerful hurricane entering the Caribbean, going through most of the islands or just south of them, probably reaching Category 4 and even possibly Category 5 status before slamming into either Jamaica, Haiti, or Cuba. Then the same storm would track northwest right over Florida, most likely near Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and then probably either brushing the Carolina coast or skirting just offshore, heading out to sea. That's scenario 1. Such a hurricane will be most likely to be seen in August or September, maybe even early October, most likely September or late August. Scenario 2 would be a hurricane like Isabel from that same season, like 1964. We have a storm forming in the West Caribbean, goes north into Cuba, the west side of Cuba, and then tracks right over South Florida, heading northeast. Could also be a strong hurricane, maybe Category 3. That's scenario 2 in my opinion. And scenario 3 would probably be either or, maybe not, hopefully not both, but either or, a hurricane like Dora that comes from the east but misses most of the islands as it tracks further north, only to turn due west into North Florida or even southeast Georgia. That's why I have them in red, just in case that scenario happens. Or we could also see a further south track where, a hurricane hits the lower Leeward Islands and then goes into the Caribbean in the direction of Central America or the Yucatan Peninsula, and depending on how far north in the Caribbean it hits land, it'll track into the Gulf of Mexico and impact somewhere between, South Texas, Mexico border, and Louisiana, Mississippi border, around there. Maybe even the panhandle of Florida. Honestly, most of these places are at risk this year. And with such a crazy year probably expected, best advice would be, if you're anywhere in the Atlantic Basin, just keep your eyes on these hurricanes as they start forming, because it might get really ugly, guys. And the Chinese astrology really is backing up that possibility, in my opinion. So that's it, guys. You got to see my 2024 hurricane outlook. Once again, I'll leave you guys with the numbers that I'm expecting for the season. The seasonal totals that we may end up with: 25/11/7, 25 named storms, 11 hurricanes and 7 major hurricanes, and the potential tracks. So let's just hope for the best, my friends. Let's hope for the best. I will keep you guys updated as the season goes on. If I do see any sort of danger brewing down the line, I'll be sure to try to have another video out for it. And yeah, If you guys want to learn a little bit more about Chinese astrology, I also suggest see my previous video, the one where I talked about earthquakes and what 2024 could bring. So that's it, guys. Thanks again for watching. If you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, please do so. Feel free to subscribe and have all notifications on, so whenever I post anything new or even a comment, you can get, you know, some sort of alert that I did. So hope you guys have a good summer. Stay safe. Take care. Goodbye.